Good night, everyone. Close your eyes. Let everything else go and just focus on my voice, because tonight's story won't come in your sleep. It'll come in your dreams. Some doors should never be opened. Some secrets should stay hidden. Tonight we follow a story where curiosity isn't just dangerous. It's a prophecy waiting to be fulfilled. It was a cold, rainy night in Portland. The streets outside glistened under the amber glow of streetlights, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows filled the small apartment where Lena lived with her roommate Harper. They had always gotten along well. Harper was quiet, kept to herself, and always seemed deeply absorbed in her writing. Lena figured she was working on a novel or maybe journaling. Either way, Harper never talked about it. But lately, things had changed. Harper had grown more secretive. She locked her bedroom door even when she was inside. She muttered to herself under her breath when she thought Lena wasn't listening. And worst of all, Lena had caught her staring at her, whispering strange things she couldn't quite hear. One night, while Harper was out for a late walk, Lena heard a soft click, the sound of Harper's door swinging open just slightly ajar. Curiosity gnawed at Lena. Against her better judgment, she stepped inside. Harper's room was darker than she expected. Thick curtains blocked out the city lights. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on her chest. Then, on the desk, Lena saw it. A small leather journal locked with an intricate silver clasp. The journal almost seemed to hum, vibrating with an energy Lena couldn't explain. Her fingers brushed against it, and without thinking, she pulled open the drawer next to it, and there, tucked under a stack of papers, was the tiny silver key. The moment she turned the key and opened the journal, the room seemed to grow colder. The first few pages were filled with mundane notes, grocery lists, random thoughts, strange poetry. But the further Lena read, the darker the entries became. One entry, dated December 3rd, 2024, tomorrow, chilled her to the bone. Lena knocks over the vase at 10:37 p.m. Glass shatters, blood on the floor. Harper doesn't help, she only watches. Lena's hands shook. She looked at the clock. 10:34 p.m. Her eyes darted to the living room where a tall vase stood precariously near the edge of a table. "No," Lena whispered. "It's just a coincidence. It's just a dream." But even as she told herself that, her foot caught on the edge of the rug. She stumbled forward, and her elbow clipped the table. Crash. The vase shattered into 1,000 pieces across the hardwood floor. Tiny shards skittered everywhere, catching the light like knives. In her panic, Lena tripped and fell, slicing her palm open on the broken glass. She gasped, clutching her hand. And then she felt the gaze. Slowly, she turned her head toward the hallway. There, standing half-shrouded in the darkness, was Harper. Her eyes were wide, almost feverish, and her lips curved into a faint, chilling smile. She made no move to help Lena, just watched, exactly as the journal had said. Lena scrambled to her feet, heart pounding in her ears. She rushed back to Harper's room, flipping through the journal desperately. Each entry seemed to predict terrible events, each one worse than the last. A fire, screaming, a door slamming shut, someone never leaving the apartment again. At the very back of the journal, one final entry was scrawled in frantic, jagged handwriting. December 4th, 3:13 a.m. Lena tries to escape, but the apartment won't let her. Neither will I. The rain outside pounded harder against the windows. The lights flickered. Lena dropped the journal and sprinted to the front door, but no matter how hard she twisted the lock, the door wouldn't open. It was as if the very walls of the apartment were shifting, sealing her inside. Behind her, Harper's voice rang out, eerily calm. "You shouldn't have opened it, Lena. Now you're part of the story." December 4th, 2024, 4 a.m. Neighbors reported hearing screams and frantic banging coming from the third-floor apartment at 1211 Hawthorne Lane. But by the time the police arrived, the place was empty. No sign of Lena, no sign of Harper. Only the journal remained, lying open on the floor with a fresh new entry. The story never ends. It only begins again. And if you listen closely on stormy nights near Hawthorne Lane, some say you can still hear the sound of frantic whispers and the soft scrape of a journal page turning in the dark. It was the kind of night when even the shadows seemed too heavy to move. In the crumbling old duplex on Cedar Street, the wind rattled the broken window panes and the walls seemed to groan under some invisible weight. Nina Aldridge, a 24-year-old artist trying to start fresh, had thought she was lucky to find such a cheap place in historic Salem, even if it carried the heavy scent of dampness and forgotten things. She shared it with Marcy Wren, a girl about her age who was so quiet, Nina often forgot she wasn't living alone. Marcy worked odd hours, often disappearing during the day and only stirring at night, when the floors creaked with her silent movements. On the night of March 12, 2025, something felt even stranger than usual. Nina awoke abruptly, her dreams torn apart by a sound, faint but steady, a tapping, like long fingernails brushing against wood. The clock on her nightstand read 2:44 a.m., its green digits flickering weakly. Pulling her blanket around her, she strained to listen. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from outside. It was inside, within the very bones of the house. Summoning her courage, Nina slipped out of bed, shivering not just from the cold, but from a deep, gnawing dread clawing at her spine. Grabbing her flashlight, she tiptoed into the hallway. The air smelled fouler here, thick with mildew and something else, something metallic, like blood left to rot. The tapping grew louder, leading her to a narrow stretch of wall between her bedroom and Marcy's. Odd. She had never paid attention to that wall before. As she examined it, the beam of her flashlight revealed something disturbing. The wallpaper seemed to breathe, pulsing slightly like skin over a living thing. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her curiosity was stronger. With trembling fingers, she peeled back the aged wallpaper. To her shock, it came away easily, revealing a small, almost child-sized wooden door. Dust floated through the air like tiny spirits, and the handle, made of tarnished brass, looked untouched for decades. Against all reason, Nina reached out and turned the handle. The door creaked open with a mournful whine. A foul gust of air blew past her, carrying with it the stench of decay. Shining her light inside, Nina realized it wasn't just a crawl space, it was a hidden room, untouched by time. The walls were covered in deep scratches, as if something had tried desperately to claw its way out. In the center of the floor lay a circle of brittle yellowed bones surrounding a strange black symbol burned into the wooden floorboards. Around the room, dozens of old photographs dangled from strings crisscrossing the ceiling. Nina stepped inside, drawn forward by a horrifying fascination. The photos were warped with age, but each face was unmistakable. Mouths open in silent screams, eyes scratched out or missing entirely. Some of the faces seemed familiar. One looked eerily like the old woman who lived 2 doors down. Another resembled the mailman she hadn't seen in weeks. In a far corner, a battered journal lay open. The pages were filled with dense, chaotic handwriting. As Nina flipped through, one phrase kept repeating itself, scrawled more frantically each time. The vessel lives among them. It watches. It waits. When the blood moon rises, the final rite begins. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She backed away, heart thudding painfully against her ribs, when a creak echoed behind her. Spinning around, she froze. Marcy stood there, half in shadow, her head tilted unnaturally to the side. Her eyes, once a dull hazel, now gleamed an unnatural shade of red. Her skin seemed too tight across her bones, almost translucent under the flashlight's beam. And then Nina saw it. Marcy wasn't breathing. "You shouldn't have found this," Marcy whispered, her voice no longer human, more like the low hiss of a snake. "Now, you belong to the house too." The hidden door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Nina screamed and lunged at it, but it wouldn't budge. Behind her, Marcy began chanting a guttural language that made Nina's ears ring and her vision blur. The very walls seemed to pulse with each word, and the black symbol on the floor started to glow. Nina backed against the wall, clutching the journal to her chest. The photographs began to sway violently, though no wind touched them, and faint whispers rose from the circle of bones. Through the haze of terror, Nina realized the truth. Marcy wasn't a person. She was a vessel, a shell animated by something far older and far hungrier. The hidden room wasn't just a secret, it was a prison. And now Nina was trapped inside it, just another sacrifice for whatever ancient evil slept within the house's walls. March 13, 2025, 7:06 a.m. When the landlord arrived the next morning, after receiving complaints from neighbors about strange noises, he found the house eerily silent. Marcy's room was empty, and Nina's belongings were still scattered around, as if she had simply vanished. There was no sign of a hidden door, no secret room behind the wall, just smooth, cracked plaster. But as he turned to leave, something caught his eye. A single yellowed photograph had been slipped under Nina's bedroom door. It showed Nina standing frozen in terror, her eyes scratched out, and in the background, the faint, shadowy figure of Marcy smiling, her hand resting firmly on Nina's shoulder. The humid October air in New Orleans pressed heavy against the old, crumbling walls of the house on Rampart Street. To tourists, the city was music and color. To those who stayed long enough, it was a place where shadows walked among the living. Eli Carter, a 23-year-old college senior, knew something about the city's darker pulse. But he never thought that pulse would seep into his own home. At first, his new roommate, Julian Morrow, seemed normal, quiet, polite, a little aloof maybe, but no red flags. Julian said he was working nights at a nearby diner to pay for classes, which explained his constant disappearances after dark. Eli barely noticed at first, until the strange noises began. Whispers that seemed to slither through the vents, the scent of burning herbs clinging to Julian's clothes, and the fact that no matter how late it got, Julian never seemed tired. On October 17th, 2024, something shifted. Eli woke at 2:13 a.m., heart hammering. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the metallic taste in the air, or the faint chant drifting up from the street. When he crept to the window, he caught a glimpse of Julian leaving the house, dressed all in black, a hood covering his head. Compelled by something he couldn't explain, Eli threw on a jacket and followed. The streets were nearly deserted, the gaslights casting long, sinister shadows. Eli stayed far enough back not to be seen, but close enough to keep Julian in view. Julian moved with a purpose, weaving through alleys and abandoned lots until he reached an old, crumbling church on the edge of town, the St. Augustine ruins, long closed after a fire gutted it 10 years earlier. Eli watched from behind a toppled gravestone as Julian approached the ruined altar. He wasn't alone. Hooded figures circled the altar, their low, guttural chanting filling the air. In the center of the circle, laid out on cracked stone, was something that made Eli's blood run cold, a body, limp and pale, with dark symbols carved into its skin. Frozen in terror, Eli realized this wasn't just some weird college club. This was a cult, and Julian wasn't just a member, he was leading them. Julian threw back his hood. Under the flickering torchlight, his face seemed wrong, too sharp, his eyes reflecting the flames like a predator's. He began to speak in a language Eli couldn't understand, each word warping the air, making the ruins vibrate. The hooded figures knelt lower, faces hidden. The body on the altar shuddered. Eli stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. His foot caught a loose stone, sending it skittering across the ground with a sharp clink. Julian's head snapped toward the noise. For a moment, everything stopped. The chanting, the air itself. Eli ducked behind the grave, holding his breath. Footsteps approached, slowly, deliberately. "Eli," Julian's voice called out, eerily calm. "You shouldn't be here." Terror roared through Eli's veins. He bolted, sprinting through the dark alleys, not daring to look back. He didn't stop until he reached the house, slamming and locking the door behind him. When morning came, Julian was already sitting at the kitchen table, sipping coffee as if nothing had happened. He looked up, smiled warmly, and asked, "Rough night?" Eli said nothing. But in that moment, he knew the truth. He wasn't living with a student. He was living with something ancient, something that wore Julian's face. And somewhere deep in the heart of New Orleans, the ruins still whispered his name. The apartment on Holloway Street had been standing for over 100 years, and it looked every bit its age. Cracks spiderwebbed across the ceilings, the pipes rattled whenever the water ran, and at night the entire building groaned and sighed as if it were alive. But Ava Reynolds didn't have many options. She was new to Boston, new to everything, and rent was cheaper when split. Her roommate, Nina Carter, had seemed ideal. Quiet, polite, rarely around. It seemed almost too perfect, and maybe it was. The first few nights were uneventful, save for the usual noises old apartments make. But starting on the fifth night, Ava noticed something different. Lying in bed, she heard faint whispering coming from the vent above her head. At first, she dismissed it as the wind, or maybe a neighbor's television. But the whispering didn't sound like anything random. It sounded intentional, deliberate. Words, sentences, spoken directly to her. Asterisk, asterisk, she knows, she listens. She sat up in bed, heart hammering against her ribs, and strained to listen. The voice was low, raspy, but undeniably human. Terrified, she clutched her blanket to her chest and waited for morning. By the next night, curiosity battled fear. As the clock ticked toward 1:46 a.m., the whispering began again, just as before. But this time, she heard more than one voice, one she recognized as Nina's and another that chilled her soul. It was deeper, somehow wrong, a voice that didn't sound like it belonged to anyone alive. She's awake. She sees us. Wait, soon. Ava wanted to confront Nina, but the fear of sounding insane held her back. She decided instead to watch Nina the next day, looking for any signs of strangeness. And she found them. Nina's reflection didn't seem to match her movements exactly in the hallway mirror. Sometimes Nina mumbled to herself under her breath, speaking words that made Ava's ears burn, though she couldn't understand them. Still, Ava said nothing. On November 7th, 2024, at precisely 2:03 a.m., Ava decided she couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed a flashlight, unscrewed the vent cover, and peered into the darkness. For a moment, there was nothing but a stale, musty smell and dust. But then, far down the vent shaft, something shifted. A face, twisted, pale, with hollow black sockets where eyes should have been. It pressed its rotting lips against the metal and smiled. Ava staggered back. A scream caught in her throat. She scrambled to reattach the cover, her hands trembling. But when she turned, Nina was standing in her doorway, watching her, silent, smiling that same impossible smile. "You looked," Nina whispered, her voice layered as if something else was speaking through her. "Now they'll come." The next days blurred together in a haze of terror. Lights flickered. Doors opened and slammed shut without warning. Shadows moved along the walls, whispering Ava's name in voices she recognized and in voices she didn't. Sleep became impossible. The building itself seemed to turn against her, creaking and groaning at all hours, mocking her fear. Nina grew stranger too. Her eyes lost their shine, turning glassy and hollow. She stopped eating. She stopped pretending. Sometimes Ava caught her crawling on all fours at night, muttering to the shadows, disappearing into corners where no one should have been able to fit. Desperate, Ava tried to flee. She packed her bags and bolted for the door. But the front door wouldn't budge. The lock spun endlessly in circles, trapping her inside. When she pounded on the windows, she realized with dawning horror that the street outside was gone, replaced by endless black fog. "You're part of us now," Nina whispered from behind her. "You listened, you heard, now you belong." The last thing Ava saw before she blacked out was Nina's face splitting open, not with a scream, but with an unearthly howl that echoed through every pipe and vent of the building, shaking it to its rotting foundations. She woke up hours later, or days, she couldn't tell, in her bed. The vent above her head was gone. In its place was a yawning, gaping blackness that seemed to pulse with breath. The whispers were no longer faint. They were right beside her, brushing against her ears, slipping inside her mind. And when she tried to scream, she found she had no voice left at all. Now, at 1:46 a.m. every night, the whispering continues. Only now, Ava is one of the voices in the vent, waiting for the next tenant to listen. When Olivia Bennett first moved to Portland, she had dreams of a fresh start. New city, new job, new life. Finding an affordable place to live was supposed to be the hard part, but the ad for a cozy downtown two-bedroom apartment seemed almost too good to be true. Quiet roommate, friendly, clean, seeking same, it read. After a short meeting at a busy cafe on November 28, 2024, Olivia shook hands with Maya Collins. A smiling, soft-spoken woman who appeared to be exactly what Olivia needed. Normal, non-threatening, and just a little shy. Within a week, Olivia was settled into her new home. At first, life was peaceful. Olivia spent her days working and her evenings exploring the city. Maya kept mostly to herself, always polite but strangely private. She never invited friends over, rarely left her room, and never seemed to sleep. Olivia chalked it up to nerves. After all, some people just needed more personal space. But little things began to gnaw at her. Maya didn't seem to have a phone, or if she did, Olivia never once saw her use it. She never received mail. No family ever called. Sometimes Olivia would hear faint noises at night, low murmurs, the soft scraping of furniture, the unmistakable sound of footsteps pacing endlessly in the living room, only to find Maya sitting perfectly still when she dared to peek out. Once, Olivia spotted her standing at the window at 3 a.m., just staring into the blackness beyond, unmoving for what felt like hours. On December 10th, an unsettling discovery broke the surface. A letter arrived, addressed to the apartment but bearing a name Olivia didn't recognize, Celia Hartman. Maya had snatched it up before Olivia could say anything, stuffing it hastily into her hoodie. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. Something was wrong. The final piece fell into place late one night, just before midnight, on December 12th, 2024. Olivia was sitting in the dimly lit living room, scrolling mindlessly through news articles, when a familiar face flashed across her screen. It was Maya, or at least it looked like her. The headline hit her like a punch. Missing. Maya Collins, age 26, last seen October 9th, 2024. Friends suspect foul play. The article described Maya as bright, outgoing, loved by her community, completely different from the woman Olivia lived with. There was even a note from her employer. Maya hadn't shown up to work for 2 months. Police had no leads, no body had been found. Stomach clenching in terror, Olivia realized whoever was living with her wasn't Maya Collins. Her mind raced. She remembered all the oddities, the locked bedroom, the strange pacing at night, the dead stare, and a new terrible thought crept in. What if the real Maya hadn't disappeared by accident? What if she had been replaced? Panicked, Olivia grabbed her phone and tried to call her sister. The signal failed. No bars. In a building that always had perfect reception. The apartment was oppressively quiet, except for a faint creaking sound from the hallway. She turned, and there stood Maya, watching her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You found me," she said softly, almost sadly. "I hoped you wouldn't." Olivia backed away slowly, heart hammering against her ribs. Who are you?" she whispered. The thing that looked like Maya stepped forward, her face beginning to ripple as though her skin was only a thin mask stretched over something else entirely. Her voice layered into a low, distorted rasp. "I'm the one who stays, when the real ones leave." Frozen in terror, Olivia watched as Maya pulled a small, worn leather journal from behind her back and tossed it onto the floor. The book burst open on impact, pages fluttering wildly. Each page was filled with names of people, addresses, dates of disappearance. Each entry ended the same way. Replaced, room available. Olivia turned to run, but the apartment had shifted. The walls seemed to close in, the front door now further away than it should have been, stretching endlessly down a dark corridor that hadn't been there before. Behind her, the creature moved with impossible speed, whispering promises she didn't dare hear. She reached the door, fumbling with trembling fingers to undo the locks, and just as she flung it open, she risked one last glance back. Maya stood smiling in the doorway of the apartment, waving goodbye, her eyes no longer human, but dark, endless pits. The door slammed shut behind Olivia. She stumbled into the freezing Portland night, gasping for air. She ran down the street without looking back, without stopping. She never returned to the apartment. She never spoke about what happened there. A month later, a new ad appeared online. Room for rent, quiet roommate, friendly, clean, seeking same. A girl named Sophie answered it,